Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Will Breakell, CEO of Blazy Susan. Thank you very much for joining me today, Will.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. Pleasure to be here.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Will, I always like to start with a little bit of background. So what was it that brought you to the cannabis industry, and how did you come up with the Blazy Susan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I've always been a cannabis user, since the early years of middle school, high school, and so I'm from Virginia, and so there wasn't a lot of access out there. So started from the bottom in a lot of ways, and got into the cannabis industry professionally actually in 2013 on the stock market side. So it was. I've always been an entrepreneur, had a landscaping business, again, something that is very cannabis and grass friendly, doing landscaping. So kind of went from that into the cannabis, stock market, was kind of trying to trade stocks and invest my own money and be smart there. And as soon as I saw the cannabis industry start to, emerge, it seemed like such a great intertwinement of passion and opportunity. And so I got in and made a bunch of money and then lost it all. Basically, the whole industry went up, it went and crashed down in the very early days. So, tons of these pump and dump kind of penny stocks. And I think, the sector has done that now, I think twice. And we're in this kind of slow decline, but that was really the first, time jumping into it, seeing the opportunity from an investor standpoint, all the different companies, the brands, the, manufacturing equipment, I've seen a lot of people come and go since then. Blazy Susan really came when I first moved to Colorado. So I moved to Colorado in 2014. After I lost all my money in the stock market, I had to get a real job, and was fortunate enough to get a job in Denver. Which I had visited actually, for the first annual Denver Pot Stock Conference, which was in 2014. So that was a, blast from the past, but ended up moving out here. And as soon as I moved here, I moved in with, 3 other people. So it was a big house full of guys. They had all this cannabis stuff, right? So they had the volcanoes, they had the bongs, they had the dab rigs, the honey straws, just every possible piece of equipment you could think of. And, coming from Virginia and my little tiny, one hitter, fake cigarette and globe pen that was terrible, it was just like being in a wonderland. And Blazy Susan came from, seeing how messy their coffee table was, in a high moment of clarity. I was like, we got to do better. Because I went to a military college. And so that, kind of fresh out of that, my brain was still programmed to like, I have to fold my socks a certain way. I have to have everything like, tidy. There's, a lot of rules and a lot of ways that they want you to present yourself. So, in that moment, it was like, hey, there's a lot of people that like cannabis that aren't necessarily, they don't want this kind of messy atmosphere. So that was really like the birthplace. And that was in 2014. Fast forward 3 years, I was still working jobs outside of cannabis. I was in healthcare, didn't really love it. And the Blazy Susan was just this little seed that just kept growing in my brain. And so I eventually quit my job in 2017, started everything through Instagram, through the local Denver community, and, built the concept really from nothing. And, it started with a rolling tray and it developed into papers. My mother's a breast cancer survivor. So there was another kind of eureka moment of, what can Blazy Susan do for the culture and what can we offer, with this name, with this fun branding. And that's kind of the genesis of it, is that, we started really trying to solve problems, clean up that coffee table, make the cannabis ritual something that you don't need to hide, right? Everything was a stash box and like, let's put it in a shoebox and put it under our bed. And so we kind of went away from that and said, let's celebrate it. Let's make it special.
So how did the volatility of the stock market not chase you from the market, not chase you from the industry?
That's a great question. I think it's because I'm very stubborn. I think to anyone in this industry, I think has to have grit. But I think for me, the biggest thing was, at least in the stock market, is being able to win. Like, a lot of people, they may work a long time and they don't see success, and I think that's what turns a lot of people away. It's like, they quit right before they make it. I kind of shortcutted that because of the timing and where I was. But I think being able to see that and say, like, I got here and I can maybe do it again. Now, was it as easy? Definitely not. I think building a brand and building a product, it's definitely a completely different challenge from trading stocks. But my personality, this is something I learned, because I traded for like 4 years, and I did it, with my own money, lost my own money, worked for other people, lost their money and got fired. So, so I knew a lot about myself doing that. And it was, you know, to trade stocks, you have to be like a robot. You have to be very calculated, very computational. And for me, I'm more emotional. So when I believed in an idea, or I believed in like a thesis, an investment thesis, it was really hard for me to turn around on my own opinions. So, what I found out that I was really great at is sticking with something and really believing into it, using that emotion to power a brand and power an identity, rather than, in a stock market type scenario, you can lose it all in one day if you make the wrong moves. And it's a lot harder to do that. And so, kind of just learning how to work with my strengths, of my personality, and, trying to avoid those same pitfalls. That's where I would say, like, it definitely, it definitely means a lot to have that taste of success. And that is, that motivates you.
Did your military service conflict at all with this passion for cannabis?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I actually didn't serve in the military. I went to a military college. It's
Oh,
called
gotcha.
VMI. So it's like a senior military academy, but they don't require you to enlist or
Okay.
join the military afterwards. Which for me, I think, as soon as I got there, I was like, you know what? I don't think this is what I want to do for another 4 years. I'm gonna do this and be done with it. But I was a economics and business major there, and I think, during that time it was very interesting because, I actually started to convince a lot of people in military school that they should be investing in weed stocks, including like, the commandant of our cadet corps, and like, these like colonels and people that were like, "What are you doing over there?" And I'm like, "Oh, check this out," and so I was never drug tested, which is great. So I think that, not being in the military, kind of taking this private path, and really I think just being passionate, allowed me to kind of move through that. But it wasn't always cannabis. I was investing in certain other things, and, I think that my brain is always constantly looking for ideas, looking for, plays essentially. And so that's what's been really fun about Blazy is, I do a lot of the product development, and those are things that I think I enjoy the most, is building and creating new concepts or ideas.
Well, that's what I was curious about next is that, so you said you started kind of rolling out the idea on Instagram. When did you start the R&D process and kind of developing your idea?
Yeah, so the initial rolling tray, I want to say, took probably about 4 months to get to its final stage, which
Hmm.
sounds like really fast. But there's a great story behind it. So when I was in the process of quitting my job, I worked for a healthcare technology company. I started. This was like my first introduction into a startup, and I think that was one of the best things that I've ever done, was like working in that culture, going from like a corporate thing where it was like, hey, I can interact with the CEO, I can talk to everyone, I can be in the meetings, I can, hear the strategy, and wearing a lot of hats. That really gave me the confidence to start my own company. And so, when I transitioned out of that job, like, I had the full support of the team. I did well there. I made them money. I said, look, I got this crazy idea, I got to go do it. And so they kind of supported me out of that. So I think it was a really positive experience for me, to be able to have that flexibility of like working a job, but like, it's like the side hustle becomes the real hustle. And so, throughout a couple months, I was working with people, spending, some of my money. I was in sales. So like every commission check, right? I'd peel off a couple $1,000 and be like, all right, well, now I got to do this or I got to build that. And so we built a couple prototypes. It started off complicated and I quickly realized, the less parts, the better. As just a rule of thumb, is just like every extra part you have in any product just creates more work, especially when you're doing it yourself. And so we kind of started with another concept. We kind of boiled it down, and then what ended up happening in basically in December of 2017, we had like our most recent prototype, and we got it on CNN. And it was not just any CNN; it was for the New Year's Eve ball drop at like midnight. So we were one of the first companies, and this was like the first time CNN actually talked about cannabis, was that New Year's Eve for going into 2018. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. I paid a guy $250. His name's Michael Cassini. He has a magazine called The Cannabis Cactus, and he said it's going to be the best $250 you've ever spent, and he was right. And so basically, I paid this guy. I didn't even have product. I was just still developing an idea, but I said, look, I need to promote it. I'll spend your $250, get in the magazine. And so he ended up getting us on, about a minute and a half of airtime, because what they did is that, when they go around to all the different cities for New Year's and they're like, hey, we're in Atlanta. Hey, we're in, Denver. And then like the reporter that's in Denver is like on a pop bus. And it's like the first time that they've ever done that. And so we had our product like it was the star of the show, and it was just totally like we brought it. We didn't know what was going to happen. I was just hoping like it panned over in the background, and it was like my buddy Mikey, who's actually like our founding like angel investor. After that all happened, like he was our first angel investor, but he was out there spinning it and hamming it up. And from there, that was like, okay, that's the one that was on TV. Let's just start selling this product, right? So that was kind of when like the development ended, and we started developing products to put like on top of the tray, right? And so then we built more of like an ecosystem around, hey, we got a tray. Okay, now I think we should do papers. We should have something unique. At the time, no one was really doing pink papers, and so that was something that we were like, okay, there's a unique product, and really people like the quality. So we do everything, even to this day. Like we send out hundreds of different prototypes to people to test. So right now we're sending out prototypes for a lavender wrap, which is like a lavender based blunt wrap style product. But that's kind of what we did with the papers. Is I sent out like 2 sheets of rolling paper in envelopes with like a sticker to these first 200 people on my Instagram, and it was just like, hey, everyone thought they were awesome, and they were saying, oh, this is better than all these big legacy brands. I'm not going to say their names, but like there's like 3 major big brands out there, I would say. And people were like comparing us and saying like, oh, you're at least here, or you're better than here. And so my brain just is going like, wow, I can't believe this. So we rolled with it, right? Is like we take the feedback and we roll with it. To this day, we stay really connected to the customers with new products. And I think that's why we've been so successful, because we're staying connected to what people want and not just assuming what they want, but like asking them, letting them try it. And I think that's a really special part of like our brand, is that was like since day one, and we stuck with that. So our logo, all the packaging, the tray, like everything was done through surveys. Like you could go to Reddit right now and find a post from 2017, and it's like my logo all drawn out in like line drawings. And I was like, hey, what do you guys think about this? And then they're like, oh, rotate to the left, tweak this, tweak that. And like we made a lot of those changes. And that's been the really fun thing for me as an entrepreneur, is like having this engaged community that is very like eager to give ideas and communicate, because we don't necessarily take every idea, but I think we've done really well at like aggregating the best ideas and pulling things out of that community that people want and that people want to see.
Well, I think it's really smart because you're essentially crowdsourcing the design and marketing, and at the same time kind of building this community buy-in for people that actually feel like they have a stake because, they helped build the brand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say that, I just don't see any other way to do it in hindsight, right? It's like, I just don't know. I think I would have done something that didn't catch on. Right.
Yeah.
And so, So yeah, so it's been really amazing to have that experience. I think it really it goes back to a lot of like famous entrepreneurs, right? Where it's like at the end of the day, right? Like Apple and Steve Jobs, like he was just like obsessed about the product, obsessed about the customer and the product. And, same thing with Jeff Bezos, right? He's like, the customers matter. Like, if their experience is good, then we're going to win. And if they feel good about it, then we're going to feel good about it. And so I think that's just a constant relationship that in all businesses is really important. So we've just tried to do our best to kind of stay to those tenants even as we get bigger, and just try to stay innovative is ultimately like where we look at the competitive landscape, right? Like we're always still trying to come up with new ideas and talk to people about it, because that's what got us here. And I think it's going to continue our legacy, so to speak, for the next 5, 10, hopefully more than 10 years. And yeah, that's kind of where we see things.
Do you do your own manufacturing?
Yeah, so we actually just recently acquired a manufacturing facility in France last year, which is really exciting. So our cones are made in India, and most of those are rolled by hand, believe it or not. A lot of the cones in the industry are. So that's where things have come from basically up until hopefully next year. We're going to be building our own facility in the U.S. to manufacture some of our cones with machines, which is really exciting. But our goal, and then what we've been really working on in the last 18 months, is vertically integrating all of our paper touching products. So the booklets, the cones, the blunt wraps are done in the Dominican. But really, I would say most things that we're sourcing are multinational, where it's a larger supply chain than a lot of people would think. We get our packaging, we get our Mylars from China, we get our T wraps, for instance. We order that sheet, and it's actually made in the U.S. for some of those products. Some of the sheet is made in Europe, and then we ship it down to the Dominican, combine it with the packaging, and that's what we call a converter, which basically says I take the materials, I take the paper, we convert it into the finished product, and then we import that. So I would say that we're buying from China, we're buying from India, and we're buying from Europe and the Dominican. Those would probably be our five, or four or five markets that we're buying from. But we used to actually manufacture all the rolling trays ourselves. So we built a really cool manufacturing facility here in Denver, which is still around, but we've transitioned from building rolling trays to doing like full custom marketing build outs, booths. We do things for very large brands like Cafe Bustelo or Grey Goose, Modelo. And so we've kind of like taken this experiential marketing side that we've used to help build our brand. And now we're kind of like doing that as a service for other brands, not just in the cannabis industry, but outside of that. So, all the CNC routers and printers and lasers, there's a lot of fun stuff. So we've got a website, it's called blazybuilds.com, but that's really where I think I personally am the most passionate about, like, all the things that we're doing. Obviously, like, we're developing products and retail things, but it's really cool to be able to have a facility where, we can take an old Airstream and build it into a spaceship. And so you'll see that at MJ Biz this year, but like, we take these things and really create experiences. And we've always known how to do it, like, I would say in a startup manner, right? Scrappy, being tight on budget when we can. We've never really lost that identity of trying to be really efficient and do things ourselves if we can. And that really started very early for us, because no one could manufacture what we wanted. Like especially the rolling trays. It was like, hey, I have to buy $60,000 worth of these to get them made in China. Well, that's never going to happen. When I was first starting, I just didn't have the money, and we didn't have like, a big investor that was just, hey, here's a bunch of money, go spend it. So, that really helped build us and, create a lot of, I would say, metal and grit within our organization. And it's really cool because a lot of people that started when we really kind of started scaling was 2020. We started to really blow up in 2020, but a lot of people that started, are still here with us today. So we've got a lot of people that have been here, 3 or 4 years now. They've seen us move buildings like 5 different times. So it's really fun to be able to like see that professional development as well with people that, started in the trenches. And, when I was doing the forklifts and the sales and all these different jobs, right. Seeing how that's developed is really awesome. And I think it's been a really great experience just for me as someone I've never really built a company. right? I had my own things. I did trading, but I never had a lot of employees, right? So we have like about 50 employees now, maybe more. Um, and it's really amazing to see people that started like just sanding rolling trays. Like there's a guy, Scott, who works for me, and he was sanding the rolling trays, and I just said, I need you to do this now. I need you to do this. And so, over those, last 4 years, he's now, running, he's a, CAD engineer. He can run all the machines, and he's also now managing and like my right hand in product development. So just like being able to take people and like be a vessel for their passion and initiative in a startup environment is like, I think, one of the most rewarding things that I've gotten out of it. Just seeing people like chase the opportunity and rise to the occasion.
With a global supply chain, are you feeling any impact from the tariff situation?
So that's a great question. I think we're feeling an impact from the tariff, not as directly on our products, but I think in the overall market sentiment is I think that if people weren't stocked up, we tried to get ahead of that a little bit and kept a little bit more inventory, especially from China, because we knew that was a big target. And, thankfully that's kind of been resolved now. But India is a big issue for a lot of people because I would say half of the pre-rolled cones in the US market are coming from India. So, now we're at a 50% level with that. Um, so I think if those companies weren't prepared to import and, because again, tariffs, it's interesting because tariffs work, but you can always work around them. And I think it's been a constant game of, companies and vendors and suppliers and buyers saying like, okay, well, if I start a company in the US and I can import it and I say, oh, it costs me less because I'm the manufacturer and I'm not selling it to me, so we've been able to kind of get around some of those things by just having good partners that are like, hey, we're thinking about this, we're getting in front of it. And so I would say our impact has been pretty minimal, and we were able to make it through the first 4 months of the trade war, call it like Liberation Day. I don't even remember when it was. We're just going month by month this year. So, so kind of happy to be through that period of chop. But I think the market has slowed down when you look at like, there's so many other inputs coming from China in the cannabis industry, for instance, like the carts, the packaging, all these different things. So if you weren't dialed in and you weren't prepared, I definitely feel like there's been impacts that we're feeling from like a top line sales standpoint where, there's also impacts coming from actually like vapes, right? And so we sell most of our product in smoke shops. People are banning vapes, and they're not only banning vapes, they're stopping the import of them. So these nicotine vapes are a huge lifeblood of revenue for smoke shops. And so seeing those, seeing these channels get impacted, we think is also hurting the broader market. And I would say that the consumer sentiment and strength is also probably at its lowest right now. But that being said, I am optimistic. I don't feel like things are going to go much lower than here. So, we may chop around a little bit, but I do think sentiment will hopefully be better in the coming years.
When you talk about this cat and mouse game of the tariffs, how is it that you work with your partners to kind of stay ahead of it?
So I would say sometimes just staying ahead of it is just like, hey, we got 4 months of inventory.
Okay.
And it's like, hey, let's say we had to reorder and the Chinese tariffs were 50%, we just wouldn't have ordered those products.
Yeah.
So I mean, so we were trying to stay as agile as possible. I don't
Okay.
think I don't think anyone has a crystal ball, but from our perspective, we were kind of anticipating more growth, I would say, in Q1. And so we had stocked up for that, so I can't say like, oh, I predicted this tariff war and global trade war, but we had stocked up hopefully for more sales. Now the sales didn't grow as fast as we wanted, but that ended up being a benefit because we didn't have to reorder and run out of stock in the middle of, super high uncertainty, in April or May. So I think, we got lucky there. And just overall, I think, just being able to be adaptive and just keep a tight leash on with the vendors, with your customers, and just making sure that things just aren't getting out of whack too hard for any particular party. It's like as long as the wheel can keep turning, like we'll be able to kind of keep moving and hopefully move through it. So I think just having that like glass half full mentality and like the optimism is really good, and that's something that we've tried to maintain even in this tough time where you can be uncertain, but like you can still be, positive, right? It's like it does suck, but at least you don't have to like focus in on that negativity. So yeah, so I mean, I think just overall, I think we're lucky. I think certain industries, I mean, you see like we're seeing like billion-dollar companies that are like steel and aluminum and oil and gas, like companies that relied on these commodities in the US that are getting absolutely destroyed. And these are, much larger companies than us. So I would say overall we're very grateful to not have massive impacts from that. But I know that other people, could have. But I do think the cannabis industry, for all there, I feel like there's more negativity now around maybe like MSOs and price compression, and there's some bad vibes out there, but I think overall, we didn't get super hurt because again, it's still grown here. It's not like you're importing the finished product like everyone else. And the steel and aluminum, unless you're manufacturing extraction equipment or this or that, there's just I think there's overall less impact, and that's good because the industry could definitely not take a big punch to the face right now. I think we're down, but we're not out. And so, if the tariffs, if they were like specifically targeting, oh, we're going to tax the 510 batteries, or we're going to tap, like certain things, I feel like they could have been more aggressive maybe, but those broad commodities are just hard to ignore when you're like, I build oil and gas equipment and I need to buy tons of steel to build these things. And now it costs me 50% more. So it's like, okay, that's a hard sell to customers, and people might just say, hey, we're not going to buy, you know? So for us being a good that I would say with the papers and cones being our majority of our business, we're not selling these large durable goods. We're selling things that you burn and buy again and smoke and consume. So there's just less. I think we're just again like in a smaller impact channel than some other companies.
Well, and cannabis has been seen as more of a, let's say, recession-proof industry. To what do you attribute that lull, and when do you foresee coming out of it?
I think the cannabis industry, I think it's a bit of a self-inflicted wound, to be honest. I think and this just happens in capitalism where you have these boom and bust periods of,
Mm-hmm.
hey, it's 2020, everyone's getting free money, let's go build a 1 million square foot grow because this will last forever. And you just see that happen. I mean, I saw it happen in 2019 in the hemp industry. I tried to grow hemp in 2019. Like I grew 2 acres. I'm like million an acre. So it's like, and that was the exact year that everyone did that and the price collapsed. So I think it's a bit of that where you could look at now, like, I wonder what wave we're in. If you talk about, hey, the first wave was 2013 or 2010 medical, and, maybe it was even in 2008. Like, I think we're like fourth or fifth wave now, right? Where like there were a lot of companies like myself that launched in like that 2017 to 2019 period. A lot of brands that we know, a lot of other companies, dispensaries, things like that. So I would consider us maybe like the third wave. And so I think the companies that kind of jumped in after 2020, it kind of reset the cycle where it's like all these new people came in and, just thought that this money would last forever, overproduction. And now you're seeing the impact of that. So I do think that things should hopefully kind of find equilibrium, but it's going to be more pain. I mean, you see like Air Wellness is going under, and like, I think more of that's going to happen. But to be honest, I don't think, unless something happens federally, I think those MSOs are screwed. Basically, if you're profitable, then great, you can last. But I think everyone that was running up a tab and hoped that it was going to get legalized, I think they're probably, they're seeing the outcome of a risky bet like that, and the money isn't there, the investors aren't there, and it's all debt now, and it's high interest. So if you can't
What's
pay it,
what is
then
it
you're
like a?
tanked.
I mean, what is it like a $4 billion debt cliff that's coming?
Yeah. People can't even pay their taxes.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's going to be beneficial because, like, you have to rise out of the ashes a little bit. I think there's a bit of that, and you just see these operators that are looking at these debt walls are just Hail Marrying everything. They're dropping their prices. They're hurting the overall market with that position. And they're also making us look bad as an industry because everyone's like, oh, cannabis industry, you guys are broke. Your investor base is gone. Like there's a lot of that negativity that I would say. But overall, people make money in every market, right? It's just like there's a lot of people that aren't operating well. And I think those bad operators are hurting the rest of the market because of if you can't sell, well, you just try to come in and undercut. And if that's your sales strategy, which seems to be like every big company's sales strategy is just, hey, we want to be the Walmart. There's only one Walmart. It's like you can't have six Walmarts in a town and expect everyone to do the same amount of numbers. So that's kind of my thought is like generally speaking, they're if interstate commerce goes and who knows, I'm not like I would say that I've tried to be neutral and like Switzerland and like what side do I wish the government might do? Like it's just too hard to predict. So, if I just look at it as like if interstate commerce happens, then there's going to be a ton more pain because, you're going to see all the little guys get totally taken out. And I think that's going to be an important step towards normalizing it because, when I just think about like the business aspect of it, right? And I learned this with hemp was you can't build a spreadsheet around something where the price is so volatile. It's like, hey, the spreadsheet looked great when hemp was 20,000 a liter for CBD oil, but it's like that, if that price has zero stability, well then you're taking a massive gamble. And that's why we've done so well, and I think that why we stayed in our lane in papers is because the price of a rolling paper booklet has been $2 like forever. And so even with everything right now, tariffs and this and that, like we haven't raised our pricing at all, like since 2020. So we've made, we came out at a premium. All of our competitors have had to kind of raise their prices. We've been able to weather that storm. And as we get more efficient, we can still maintain our pricing structure, which I think is something that we're really proud of. But like I said, it's just, when you're building all these spreadsheets around a commodity that is extremely volatile. So it's like, you really can't expect tranquility when that's the business model. And so if everyone's dumping it at 400 a pound or whatever, then either that's the new normal and it's going to level out, or people are going to drop out of the market, less supply. Hopefully demand is, I think demand has been probably growing less than people also assumed, right? I think like everyone's like, there was this big Florida thing, and everyone was looking at that. I also think the hemp market is absolutely cannibalizing the crap out of the legal market right now. So I think I've seen a lot of people, being in this smoke shop industry. I mean, we see a lot of hemp guys that are crushing it. I mean, they're doing insane numbers and they're shipping interstate. And, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to compete with that, I think, in a lot of levels. And so, that's kind of where I see the market is that a lot of these old school cannabis guys are in the hemp market now because they're just going like, well, why am I doing this to myself when I can just go through this loophole? And I think the only thing that I have an issue with is things that you smoke like a joint or a vape. I don't trust those in the hemp market because you're looking at like either it's THCA flower, which is just questionable. Like we wouldn't touch it just because again, and you're kind of just relying on COAs that other people put out. And you're like, I hope this is right. And, if you get caught with it and they test it, it could be hot or it could be this. So I think that's a risk. And then a lot of other stuff is like analog THCP or THCO and all these different things. And so a lot of people in the smoke shops are like pushing these vapes with these like alt cannabinoids. And I'm just more old school, but like hemp, if you want a gummy, why are you paying all that money for gummies? Just order a hemp gummy. It's the same thing. It's the same plant. Same with like beverage. So I think those are areas where I'm like supportive of it. And then in those smoking areas, like I wouldn't want to go out and buy a joint from a gas station. I would want to buy that from a licensed dispensary, ideally. But I think that's kind of where I see a big rift is that so many people are going after that easy money in the hemp market. And, that's also now not becoming as easy, right? It's like at first it was just a big loophole. Now these hemp companies are having to be very competitive and, run it like a very real and legitimate business. And so we'll see where that goes. I think I think there's a lot to be concerned about in the legal industry if the hemp industry is left unchecked. And my request would be like just maybe just reduce all the compliance, maybe get rid of the 280. Like there's just so many things that I think are on the legal market not like they're just not trying to they're just like we don't care if the playing field's like this. No one cares. And so I think it's just like if you want to stay on the bad side of that playing field, you better be good. The
Yeah.
money's there, but you better know what you're doing, or else you're gonna lose money. And that's kind of where I see like these MSOs. But there's a lot of private operators that even in like Michigan and Oklahoma and states that people are like, oh, this is so hard. It's like they're still making money and they're profitable. It's just, that's for every 10 people, is it two? Is it three that's profitable? Maybe less, right? So that's kind of where we look at it is like those two to three, that 30% is going to stay around, and that 60, 70, 80% of people are going to just churn through, and like that store is going to be this store and this store is going to turn into that store. And that's just kind of how we've seen it in Colorado, because a lot of things have changed over the years here as well.
Well, 280 I think is the lowest hanging fruit in terms of making things at least operate like a normal business expense, right?
Right.
And the other is I think that there might be legislation coming that really resets the hemp industry and some of those loopholes that are there. But I don't know. Maybe those are just we've seen some people kind of raising flags of caution that that industry might be in for some turbulent time coming up with new legislation. One thing I was curious about being in the paper space is, like you said, you started as a premium product, and that's helped you remain competitive as your competitors have had to raise their prices. Did the idea to go with pink paper and then come up with partnerships like for breast cancer awareness, stuff like that, was that all built as a tribute to your mother?
Yeah, so it actually all kind of came at the same time. It was like I remember I was in my kitchen and I was basically at this moment where it was like before CNN, and I'm like, I'm standing in the garage and I'm like, I quit my job. I don't have that much money. And so it was sort of like, man, this isn't working. Like the rolling trays, like I'm not going to sell enough rolling trays to pay the bills, right? And so it all kind of collided at the same time, which is like, what else can I do? Like where is there a gap? um but like for the cannabis industry, like it has to mean something, right? Just doing something to do it isn't always the right place. So it all kind of came together at the same time in my kitchen, and so that really, I would say, it all did kind of coalesce together, where it was like, here's a new product, there's a really great cause behind it, no one else is doing it. And the final step that kind of came later was I didn't even know if that paper was available, so I had to like search, and I found, it took me like a couple months, but I got like a couple booklets, and that's when I started shipping them out to people, like I told you. And it was like everyone just started saying this is amazing. And at that point we didn't even talk about the story yet. It was just like, hey, do you guys like this? Do you want to try it? Like, do you hate it? Does it taste like shit? Like, that kind of step. And then once we had the full buy-in, right, that we knew the story was good, we knew we knew that we had real identity behind it, something that we can get behind. And then the final step was like, does the quality actually fit our standards? Because we looked at, like, I think some of our first prototypes were like Chinese, kind of like printed soy ink. And those are just things that, like, I'm a consumer, like I use my products, I don't just make stuff and then give it to other people and don't use it. Like we use all of our stuff. So from that standpoint, um we were able to get like the full sign off. And so when that all kind of started going out, I think that's what really just made such a big impact for us, is because we had kind of all the stars aligned. And that was really, I would say, what kind of changed our brand's course from like, hey, we're this niche tray company, to now we're like a lifestyle brand, because we don't just have a cool tray, we have a cool tray and another really cool product. And so if you don't like the tray, you probably like the papers, or vice versa. And so we started like building out this several unique components about the business. And that's really where we found like we could always win someone over. It was like, okay, the really heady guys with the rigs, and they maybe didn't like the pink, but their girlfriend or spouse did, and then they love the rolling trays. And so we had something for everyone. And so just being able to like offer that to consumers and say like, look, our brand is approachable for everyone. And I think that's been a really unique part of like what we've done, because even looking at like our biggest product might be a pink paper. We now are doing green, we're doing purple, we're doing brown. We just launched a rice paper. So people really, I think, connected with the brand and just saw our willingness to like create great products for them, and that's built the brand loyalty. And so that's just what we've been able to really run with. And so this year we're also doing a couple charity collaborations with pre-roll companies in legal markets. So basically licensing the brand and then giving all of that. Usually it's like, hey, you go in and license your brand, you want a royalty. We're not keeping a penny. We're literally just saying, look, take the cones, put the cannabis in it, do it licensed, and then when you sell it, we're going to donate all the profit together. So we did that. We did that last year with a company called Dialed In Gummies in Colorado. We did it the year before with a company. Well, actually, it was with a company called the Mint Dispensaries in Arizona. So they put our charity pre-roll, in all their stores, and we were able to raise $10,000 for cancer patients like locally, which I think is a really cool aspect of like how we're trying to treat. Hey, you like our cones? Well, like now they're filled, right? You can buy them filled, and we have that same give back. And I think there's a lot more that we can give when you look at like the margins and the price of like one sheet of paper versus like a $15 joint. You can really create more impact there. And so that's what we're doing this year. And hopefully we're just going to continue that trend of again, we never try to be preachy. I think that's the big thing, is like we want to have fun but also bring awareness, right? Because it's not like you can't do one without the other. But I think a lot of times we just think doing the right thing is part of what we do, and so we don't feel like we always need to shout it from the rooftops. We just try to do it. So that's really been kind of where we stand as a brand, and as a in the community, is like we're just going to do the right thing. We're going to try to always build that into whatever we do.
Are there colors you can't use without sacrificing quality?
So right now, I would say we do pretty extensive testing on our products. We actually just got ISO and GMP certified. So I believe like we're one of the only, even like with a lot of these bigger companies, those are obviously it's much harder to get when you're really big and you have a lot more going on. So I think we take quality very seriously. Again, we're building our facility here to make bulk cones in the U.S. And the goal of that is to be ISO GMP certified so that we can offer a superior product and quality to all of these dispensaries. And we look at it as we kind of know all the paper mills. So there's a handful of paper mills, like literally about 4 in Europe. And so we are kind of able to offer the entire menu. So we can go to the paper mills that we know are good. And most of it just comes down to process, right? Is like, because with paper and trees and everything, right? Like heavy metals get pulled through in the roots, right? With all these things. Same with cannabis, especially if it's outdoor and this and that. So just making sure that, the supply chain and like their testing procedures and like everything they're doing on the back end is proper. And so that's why we've just really stayed true to our paper mills that are based in France. And so like certain other colors that you see that might be brighter or more vibrant, those are made in China. And so we just, we've always stayed like true to the quality, where it's like, yeah, like it's not just that it's pink, it's that it smokes good and that it actually is something that you want to reuse. It's not a gimmick. And so that's why we've tried to, again, we're not, I think most of the actual color comes from the packaging. The papers, if you take one sheet of paper, it doesn't have that much color to it, unless you like stack 10 of them together. So that's kind of been our philosophy, is that like the flavoring with blunt wraps, for instance, like some of those things, that's a different side where like we're using these like tobacco based flavorings. And I think people that know they're smoking like a synthetic flavor, right? Like they know what they're getting into with blunt wraps, and they want the Russian cream or they want the grape or they want this and that. They're going for that experience. But in the paper side, I would say that we stick to the right mills, and those mills with their processes and history are the people that are truly like our partners in this, because we don't look at it as like we can't do all that. We can't go that far up the supply chain. So it's all about trust and making sure that our partners are doing the testing. That gives us that level of satisfaction, along with our own internal procedures for ISO and GMP.
I just really like it as an idea as a cancer fundraiser. Just, I've done plenty of those, and you can only sell so many of those bracelets, man. But I mean, hey, if all of a sudden I've got teal pre-rolls, I think there's a whole new market you can open up.
Right, right. No, I mean that, and we'll see how it goes. I think it'll be really exciting for us. I'd like to say that we've been very wary to touch the plant, and so if it goes well and we could license our brand, it wouldn't we wouldn't look at it as like we're gonna just run out and try to license to everyone, because we kind of use the litmus test of like people would actually approach us, and then so we go, hey, like, you want to sell a Blazy Susan branded product? Well, like, we have to do the first run for charity, and like if you're not cool to give all the money back, then like we don't want to, we know that we don't want to work with you anyway. So I think we're very selective on who we work with. We want to make sure that we're working with great operators, people that care about the culture and also know their markets, right? Is that like what we've learned about the Michigan market is that they're not as concerned about like the high end stuff like in Colorado, and it's just one of those things that it might sell like 10 to 1 of like the infused botanical terp pre-rolls and versus like the rosin or versus these other products that like I'm personally great. I love the no-till organic and rosin, but a lot of other states don't care about that, or they don't have access, or the pricing is off, right? So it's not there. And I think just trying to be flexible and like go in and just genuinely put a good product out into the market, right? And that's why we think trusting those operators, vetting them, making sure that they are actually going to deliver something into the market that it doesn't like let us down and like hurt our brand is probably our biggest factor. So we don't look at it as any sort of revenue generating activity. It's purely how can we generate donations, and when we do that, it's actually Blazy Susan isn't actually giving the money. It's like we have that licensed partner, because we don't want to necessarily touch that money from cannabis. There's not a big issue with licensing, but generally speaking, we just say, look, instead of like paying us a royalty and then we give it back, just show us your cost, show us where everything is, if you guys want to market it, this and that, and then whatever's left over you donate, and then they actually are the ones getting that tax write-off. And for us, it doesn't really matter as long as the money's getting put into the market. We try to go after local charities, and I think it just builds a sense of community around like, who we are, what we're doing. And Blazy Susan is in over 2,000 dispensaries across the country. So, we look at this as something that we can expand out to and really like find the partners that are, about that community aspect, right? Like those are the people that I think are going to be here in 10 years. And I think those are the people that we want to try to build relationships with.
No, I think so too. I think that's a sound strategy. And I think the differences between, a Colorado and a Michigan market is just market maturity, right? How long it's had to adapt and evolve. I really do appreciate you taking the time. Before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure that the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or your work with Blazy Susan?
Yeah, absolutely. So since we're here about equipment, you'll see us if you're listening, come check our booth out at MJ BizCon this year. We're going to be debuting a cone filling machine. So not only will we be able to sell you bulk pre-rolls ISO GMP certified, we'll be able to help you fill those pre-rolls as well. And so it's called the Cone Pro 200. It actually holds 196 cones, so it just sounded better. But yeah, 200, roughly 200 pre-rolls, does it in about 3 minutes. Built-in closing Dutch crown system. I think we're just trying to go out there and just try to innovate in the market, where I think a lot of companies that fill pre-rolls, again, it's like you're either doing it with a super expensive machine. And we've seen a lot of people that are saying like, I bought this $500,000 machine and there's no manual, and there's like only videos. And so it's like, people get enticed and seduced by like this many per hour, and you don't have to have labor and this and that. And then they end up having to like be a full-time technician on a fancy machine that doesn't have the back end support. And so we're trying to make something that is, under $10,000, super simple, reliable, and should hopefully be competing with that Futurola knockbox. The way we look at it is we're trying to build a better mousetrap there.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, if it was more like a knockbox, like a tabletop machine.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have IP on is vacuum. So we're actually using vacuum in conjunction with vibration, so we can do it faster, and then we're also ensuring that the joints don't get overpacked. Because I'm sure as a consumer, right, it's like you can always make a joint tighter. You can never. It's a lot harder to like loosen up something that's just like a plug at the end where you're trying to pull through. So that another big component is like HEPA filtration, or like close to HEPA filtration. So like the knockbox or things that actually bounce, they're actually like throwing particulate in the air. And anyone that operates these for a long period of time, there's people that have died from, dust inhalation. Not saying that was a knockbox, but, again, just anything that is, like throwing keef into the air. Like, again, I harvested hemp. Like you don't want that in your lungs. You don't want it on your skin. It's not the most ideal thing to kind of have around you. So, as part of that process, all the actual keef is separated. We have a cyclone unit in the machine. And so we're actually cycloning 99% of all that dust and particulate out. You can recapture it. And then you also are getting it filtered so that, there's literally zero dust getting thrown into the air as you use these machines. So we look at it as like a big step for operator comfort, because again, like we've always like built things for the people. And so when we're building a machine, we're not necessarily looking at, how can we create like numbers that like an executive would want. We look at it like, how do I build a machine? Like when I bring it into that bud tender or that person that's in the back facility, like if they're happy, then I'm happy, because they're going to ask, to buy that machine instead of another one. And so, that's our bet, is that we can hopefully, improve there. It's been a really unique project for us. But, like I said, we will never be afraid to try something new. And if it doesn't work, we're also okay with that too, because you gotta do a lot of things and innovate. So, that's kind of at the core of what we do. Like I've got a whole shelf of things in the office that we tried and then never launched over the last 6 years. I mean, there's so many different things that we've looked at. And I think that's just the key with us, is like, we never stop innovating. We never stop looking for these new solutions. And, as long as you can keep the top of funnel good, then, you'll find things that drop through.
No, I think that's the sign of a sign of a healthy company and a healthy spirit, is that you continue innovating. You don't want to become complacent and watch your competitors pass you by. And as new information comes out about the machine, do you know what the official name is yet?
It's called the Cone Pro.
The Cone Pro. Okay, so as more information comes available about the Cone Pro, we'd love to learn more about it, share it with our audience, and if anything, check it out at MJ Biz.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't have my booth number there, but you won't miss us. We have a giant spaceship. If right through the main entrance is where our booth is. So we've got a pretty large one.
Okay, sounds good. We'll be near you, much smaller booth. No.
Okay. Well, hey, come do a podcast in the spaceship if you want. It's a full smoke lounge in there. Filters, all that good stuff. So welcome to come and hang out anytime.
All right, man. Well, hey, if anything, next time we talk, podcast in a spaceship.
All righty. Sounds good, David. Hey, I really appreciate the time. Thanks for having me on. And we'll see you at MJ Biz.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You could also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. All right. For Will Breakell, CEO of Blazy Susan, I'm David Manty. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.